everyone, it's Alice, and today I'm going to talk to you about all of the books that I read last month. I know this video is a little late, so sorry about that. Life just sort of went like whoosh in my face at the end of the month, and I had a lot to do both at work and at school, and I was just very busy, and I low-key hate being busy, but that's just how life is sometimes. So let me finally tell you about what I read in February, and we do have a 5-star read, which is always very exciting. The first book I read was The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Katherine Arden. This is historical fiction with some paranormal elements, and the story is set in 1917 and 1918, so towards the end of the First World War, and we meet this combat nurse who has been sent home to Canada because she was injured, and when she's home, she gets word that her brother has died in the war. But there's something off about the message that she gets, and she gets the feeling that she's not being told the whole truth. So she returns to Belgium and to the battlefield to figure out what happened to her brother and how he died and if he's dead at all. So I've read the whole Winter Night trilogy by this author and I loved it, and I was excited to read something else by her. I feel like I went into this with sort of medium expectations because it's very different than the trilogy that I read, so I didn't really know what to expect. And I just assumed that I would like it, but I am actually a little bit surprised by how much I loved it. There is something about the way this author writes that just immediately pulls me into a story. I don't really know what it is, but whenever I read her books, like what I've read, I always just want to keep reading, and I really enjoyed reading about these characters. I thought they were very interesting, and they felt in a lot of ways like real people because they're not always likable and you don't always agree with them, but yeah, they just felt like people who were in the middle of a war and trying to cope, and they're sort of like desperate. And I also really like that at the core of the story we have these two siblings, and their love for each other is sort of what hurdles the story forward. I think the historical setting came to life really well as well, and obviously there are some gruesome scenes in here because we're in the middle of a war and the main character is a combat nurse, and there are like some hospital scenes and stuff, but in general I felt like we really got transported back in time and into this setting. The paranormal element of this book I thought was really interesting. I feel like it's there to highlight the grief and the horror of this war and what happens to the people in it. And I thought that the way that the characters interacted with that paranormal element was just interesting, and I was very invested in it. I thought it was just fascinating and really well done. It has an almost gothic feel to it sometimes, like this particular element, and it was just a little bit unique, at least to me, and I thought it was really well done, and I feel like it added a lot to the story. I will say it's not like a super surprising story, I don't think, maybe except for the paranormal element, but where we're sort of going with this and where the characters end up, it wasn't like very surprising or shocking. I felt like I sort of knew where we were going most of the time, and sometimes the story would take like some twists and turns that I didn't see coming, but I sort of knew where we were gonna end up. And for me, that actually worked quite well because I just really cared about the characters. I don't really know why this story and these characters in particular had an impact on me, but I really was very invested in this book and I just couldn't stop reading. I don't know if it's the writing or what, but I just wanted to know what was gonna happen to them. And 2/3 of the way through, I felt like this was a very solid 4-star read. And then I actually got towards the end and I was like, I am getting a little emotional. Like I teared up a little bit towards the end. And I don't know what did that. Maybe I just had an emotional week. That might have been it. But it's pretty rare that books make me cry because I'm not a big crier. So whenever that happens, I always feel like maybe I should rate it even higher. But I do think it is probably more of a 4-star read. If I used half stars, I would do like 4.5. But I don't know. I just really liked this one. Again, it's not perfect and maybe it is a little bit predictable, but I just really loved it. And yeah. It was so good, and I do think that the paranormal element is very, very interesting. Then I picked up The Sun Down Motel by Simone St. James. This is a mystery novel with some horror elements to it, and it's about this young woman who decides to go to this motel in this really small town, and the motel is like super run down. And the reason that she's going there is because her aunt went missing from there 35 years earlier, and she wants to figure out what happened to her. And so the story is all about her unraveling the mystery of what happened to her aunt, but also trying to figure out what is going on with this motel, because there's a lot of weird things happening there. So I got this book because I read Broken Girls by this author and I loved it, and I just wanted to read something else by her. So I picked up this one and I'm really glad I did. I really enjoyed this one, although I would say that Broken Girls is still my favorite. A thing I really liked in her other book was the way that she created atmosphere, and I feel like she did it really well in here as well. This small town really came to life and it was very interesting and atmospheric, and there are some creepy stuff going on in here, and there's like a lot of tension, and there's even some like scary bits, but I feel like it added a lot to the story and I really liked how it was done. I just think this author is really good at building up tension in a way that I really enjoy, and I feel like the supernatural elements added a lot to that, and the way that it sort of builds up throughout the story towards the end, I just really enjoy that build up and the way that she does it. And some things are a little creepy, and I don't really know how to explain it, but it's just like buildup of tension. Now with this one, it did take me a little bit of time to get into this actually for some reason. I don't really know what it was, but it took me maybe like 100 pages into this to be like really invested and very interested. I don't know if it was because I didn't totally connect to the characters right away, maybe that was it, but I feel like that got better the further into the book I got. I do generally really like the writing of this author as well, so I ended up enjoying this one. I will say it doesn't feel as memorable to me as Broken Girls, but I do feel like that's just personal preference. There's like elements in that other book that appeal to me more than the elements in this one, and I think it's just like taste and what you like, but I really enjoyed this one and I did get very invested towards the end, and I liked how like where everything went. So this feels to me like somewhere between 3 and 4 stars, I would say. And I do want to keep reading more books from this author because I really like the writing and like the buildup of tension and the atmosphere. So if anyone has any more recommendations from this author, let me know. Next, I finally read The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. This is a historical fiction book with some fantasy to it and some horror to it, and it starts off with this young woman finding a weird and ancient book in her father's library, which when she asks him about it, he starts telling her the story of this book and the whole journey of it. And the story is linked to her mother who has disappeared, and this quest that spans decades, which is basically all about trying to unravel the myth of Dracula. Well, all of you told me that I was gonna love this book, and I'm happy to say that you were all right. I loved this. I know that this is the kind of book that is not for everyone, but it really was perfect for me. It was like a blend of a quest and myth and history and this writing that I just couldn't get enough of. Like, I just loved it. I had mentioned in some previous videos when I talked about this book that I was nervous about the length of it, and several of you told me, like, don't worry about it, like, once you get into this book, it will fly by, and that is completely the experience that I had. When I got into this book, I just could not get enough of it, and I would almost, like, race home to sit down and read this book. Like, I would eat my dinner super quickly and just be like, I have to read this because I was so into it. That's not to say that it isn't a longer book. It is. It's above 700 pages, and it's the kind of book that I think would feel slow to some, and it is a slower book in a way, but there is also a lot that happens in this book. Like, we go a lot of different places, meet different characters, like there's a lot going on. I think the thing that sort of slows it down is the writing, because the writing is quite descriptive and there are a lot of what I think were beautiful descriptions of like different settings and stuff, but I think that could feel like it sort of slows the book down a little bit. I loved it though because I love that kind of writing, but I do think if you're the kind of reader who like you don't like descriptive writing or you don't like slower books, like this isn't the one. I just loved every bit of it though. I loved getting to meet these different characters, and we meet different characters in different timelines as well. And a lot of the story is actually about the father and the mother and their sort of coming together in this quest. And I just loved reading about them and their whole story. And they go so many different places, and this quest was just so interesting. I do think that quest slash adventure thing is one of the reasons that I ended up loving this book so much, because that is a thing that I love in books and that I'm always looking for. It also has a little bit of like a dark academia thing going on in it, which I love. There's a lot about like books and different libraries, and there's like academic stuff, and I just loved it. I feel like this quest in combination with these characters that I was so invested in, and I loved seeing their stories being slowly revealed to us as well, and all of the different settings and all of the descriptions and everything. I just feel like this was just like the perfect storm. There were so many elements to it that I love in books, and I just feel like it did it really well. It really was just a joy to read this whole book. I think I went into this thinking that I was going to struggle through parts of it, but I really didn't. I just loved every page and I could not get enough of it. So much so that I think this book could have been longer and I would have still loved it, which is really saying something. Because usually, like, I don't read a lot of like super long books, but when it's like this, it's just so good. It is the kind of book that I wouldn't recommend to everyone. I don't think this is one of those books that everyone would love, but I think for a particular reader, this is just perfect, and I am definitely that kind of particular reader. Like, it was just perfect, and I couldn't get enough of it. And of course, I'm gonna give this 5 stars because it was amazing and I loved it. And I think this might be one, like a new all-time favorite, like not just a favorite right now, but like an all-time favorite. Maybe I'm saying that because it's not that long ago since I read it and I'm thinking about it a lot, but yeah, I just thought it was, oh my god, it was so good. Also, I do have to thank all of you who have mentioned this book to me for bringing it to my attention and like urging me to read it, because this is why I love having this channel so much. I don't know that I would have found this book by myself or like been interested in reading it because I would be scared of the size, but like so many of you have told me like you have to read this book, you're gonna love it. And you were right. And I give you all gold stars for recommending this book to me because it was amazing. After that though, I wanted to pick up something a little bit lighter because although I loved The Historian, the book is a little bit like on the heavier side, and I also knew that nothing was going to be able to follow that book, so I was like, I need to read something completely different, and I just wanted something short and sweet. So I read The Kamogawa Food Detectives by Hisashi Kashiwai. This is a contemporary book, and it's about this restaurant that is in Kyoto in like a sort of alleyway, and there's no signs, so it's like almost impossible to find. But the restaurant owners feel like the people who need this restaurant are going to be able to find it, because the whole thing about this restaurant is that you can go there and you can have a meal recreated from your memories. So if once you've had like some food or something that you could never find again and you just want to sort of relive the memories of that, you can go to this place and the people at the restaurant will track that dish down and recreate it for you. So this is a book that I've seen around for quite some time, and I remember when this came out, I think. I remember seeing it at least, and I was immediately interested in it because I really like these kinds of translated books. But I'm actually really glad that I waited a little bit to read this book, because I think if I'd read it right away, I would have gone into it with really high expectations. But because I waited a little bit and I read some reviews that really explained what this book actually is, and I had a friend who read this book and talked to me about it, and she was like, it's just like a cozy little book that's perfect for when you don't want to think too much. And I think that sort of helped me have the right expectations when I went into this book. For me, this was just a nice little book to read when my brain needed a break. It's not the kind of book that's gonna knock your socks off. It really is just about like this restaurant and the people who come to it to have these meals, and we see their stories. We don't actually see any detective work, for instance, which I knew about. I think if I'd read it right away, I would have thought that that was like a big part of the story, but that's not in here at all. We don't see any of the like investigating that the restaurant people do. We only see like or meet the people who come to the restaurant and they tell their stories, and that's really what it's about. I feel like it's about food and how food can be very strongly linked to our memories. Now, this is actually a thing that I really like in books. I really like reading about food and like descriptions of food. And there's a lot of it in here, and I think maybe that was even my favorite part. I don't really know why, but I just really enjoy it. And I did like reading the stories about these people as well, and I feel like there is an overarching theme of how food can be healing in a way, which I really like. And even though we don't get super deep into the characters, there is a father-daughter dynamic in here that I also really enjoy. It is definitely a repetitive book, and I've seen people say that as well. But for me, I just enjoyed it for what it was, I feel. And I feel like I picked it up at the perfect time. I just really needed to read something like this, so I ended up really enjoying it for what it was. It feels to me like a very solid 3 out of 5 star read, and yeah, I think that there's a sequel to this actually, and I am a little bit interested in the sequel because I think I enjoyed this because I read it when I needed it and I knew what to expect. So I picked this up when this is exactly what I needed, if that makes sense. And I think that the sequel would be the same. So yeah, I enjoyed it. Then lastly, I read In The Bardo by George Saunders. This is historical fiction with, again, some supernatural elements to it. It's set in 1862 over the course of one night, and the story is about how President Lincoln lost his son, and the son is placed in this graveyard, and throughout the night, Lincoln visits him several times, and we see the story through the perspective of the ghosts who live in this graveyard and are stuck in sort of an in-between space in between this world and the beyond. So this was a kind of different read for me, and I have a lot of thoughts about it. It's a kind of book where it was so interesting, and the way that the story is structured felt very unique. But it's the kind of book that's not a new favorite of mine, but I'm really glad that I read it because it just felt very different and sort of experimental. I really like how the story is set in this odd in-between world between life and death. And I thought that the way that the ghosts were done was really interesting because they manifest in sort of absurd and bizarre ways sometimes. And it's interesting because there are parts of that that are so weird that it's funny, but then the story is actually very sad, and the story of a lot of the ghosts that we meet are also sad. And I just thought it was interesting, this sort of mix. And although I felt like I couldn't fully grasp like all of the different ghosts that we meet and I didn't really know who they were, the main ghosts that we follow I really liked reading about. It's also written in a unique way, so we get like these excerpts or like quotes or whatever from different kinds of sources, and sometimes they're real, but I think they're mostly fictional. And that's a very interesting way to tell this story. Sometimes we get that, and sometimes there are like longer bits that feel a little bit more normal, I guess. And there's a mix of it. And I remember when I started this book, I was like, what on earth is this? Like, I don't understand it. But you do get into it once you actually get into the book. Now, although I understand the writing, and I think objectively this is an interesting way to tell a story, subjectively, like personal preference, this isn't my favorite kind of writing. I don't think I'm very into experimental writing at all, and this feels experimental to me at least. And I don't know if I really enjoy it. I find it sort of difficult to get emotionally invested, I think. And it's a little weird because sometimes I would read things and there was like a paragraph or something and it was just exquisite. and I would be so into it, but then 2 pages later I would be totally lost. Sometimes because of the writing and sometimes because the story is a little bizarre and the world is a little bizarre, so it's hard to sort of get a grasp of it in a way. And when the writing is like this, I just struggled a little bit sometimes with that. And I do also feel like the pacing is sometimes a little off. I think it's hard to review these kinds of books because I think this is one of those stories that's very interesting and it's definitely worth reading, but again, it's not a new favorite of mine. I think this is the kind of book that I feel like everything in this book is very intentional, and because of that, I am in a way impressed by it because I feel like it did what it tried to do, but it also didn't really make me feel that much. I think that's because of the writing, actually. And this is a very sad book, so I would think that I would feel more from it, but I kind of didn't. It's the kind of book that I feel like made its way into my brain, but not my heart. That might say more about my heart than anything else, but I don't know. I just feel like it's the kind of book that I will think about a lot, but it didn't make me feel that much. And yeah, I don't really know how to explain it. It's one of those books that's almost impossible to rate. I think it's somewhere between 3 and 4 stars, but like it is in a lot of ways a very impressive book. And I understand what it was trying to do and I do think that it did it well. I just don't know if it's just not my favorite, really. It is a book that I think I'm gonna think about a lot though, and I'm wondering if maybe on a reread I would like this more and I would have like a different experience because I would know what to expect. So maybe that would be interesting. Maybe I'll reread this someday and see. Those are all the books that I had to talk about today, though. That was everything I read in February. I feel like I had a very interesting, like, mix of books this month. Like, I read a lot of different things and a lot of things that made me think, but definitely The Historian is the one that's going to stick with me the most because I just loved it. It's also the first 5-star read of the year, which is cool. Hopefully, I will find some more, but I'm pretty stingy with my 5-star ratings, so you never really know, but I loved that one. And a lot of the other ones just made me think, and I enjoyed everything that I read. I would love to know what you all have been reading lately, though. Tell me all about it in the comments. And as always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!